Hello, and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week with me, we have Sam here. Sam, thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So this week we are talking about your game, Anamnesis. Could you tell us a bit about, what your role is in creating this, and a little bit about you for everyone if they're not familiar with you?
Yeah, sure. So I am the writer of Anamnesis. I did all of the game design for it. And I self-published it under my business, Blinking Birch Games. And as far as who I am and what my other work is, I primarily do some game design. I also have a couple of editing projects coming up, which is exciting. And I also make videos about different TTRPGs. So there's some stuff about my own games, but primarily featuring other people's work.
Yeah, I that's how I first discovered you on TikTok, because you do kind of
yeah.
little few-minute reviews on other different indie tabletop RPGs, which I loved, because also with this show I'm trying to spotlight other indie tabletop RPGs as well.
Sure,
So I was
exactly.
like, fantastic, someone else doing this. We can definitely talk and have stuff in common. So yeah, as I mentioned, we will mostly be talking about Anamnesis, your game, as the main kind of bulk of this. But before we get into talking about that, I always ask people about kind of their history and background with RPGs. So when was like the first time you played RPGs? What was your first experience with it?
Yeah, I started playing RPGs in college, and that was about 6 years ago, I think. And it started with D&D. I played a couple sessions of Pathfinder in high school, actually. Late high school, a few sessions of Pathfinder.
Okay, yeah.
Didn't really play anymore. Didn't really know what I was doing during Pathfinder, but I had a lot of fun,
Sure. Yeah.
And I really wanted to start playing in college, so I found a group of people who are also interested. A couple of people I didn't know at all, a couple people I like kind of knew, and my brother who went to the same school as me, and we all never had played before. And so I went straight into DMing, which is not something I
Wow,
necessarily
amazing.
recommend.
No?
But it was a great time. It was really nice because all of us were learning it together.
Yeah.
And that was a fantastic group. And then I was playing D&D for 4 years, and then I realized how wider the RPG space is, and haven't really looked back too much. So right now I'm primarily playing Blades in the Dark with a couple of friends, but
Awesome,
we
yeah.
like to try a bunch of different one-shots out of different things.
Amazing. Sounds really good. What was it that made you kind of step out of D&D? Because I think a lot of gaming groups, people I speak to, they're like, my group plays loads of D&D and I want to try this other cool stuff I've heard of. How? Is there a question? So what was your experience of that like?
Yeah, I was lucky because I had friends who were interested, right? Like I had people who were willing to try other stuff or had tried a couple things in the past and enjoyed it. And but for me, I learned about the wider scene through Kickstarter, because I think I was browsing for D&D modules on Kickstarter, and then I was on their RPG section and was like, whoa, what's all this? Yeah. So I wasn't really introduced to it by somebody else. I was kind of the person who then went around to all my friends and was like, play this with me. So yeah, it really just, it's been about 2 years now since really diving into it.
And you really dived into it, because you've not only have you been playing that, you started kind of creating games as well. So how did that step go from somebody who just enjoys playing games and running games to somebody that makes games?
Yeah, sure. It kind of, honestly, a lot of it had to do with the community. Like as soon as I got into this stuff and I started following some game designers on Twitter, and I really just fell in love with the indie tabletop community. They were so so creative and so encouraging, especially of new folks in the scene. And it was a community that I wanted to be a part of. But then also I found that writing RPGs was a really wonderful merging of a lot of my interests. So between being interested in writing in general, but also writing and RPGs. Theater has been a hobby of mine for a while, so you kind of get a little bit of that in there. And I just love the puzzle behind it, the kind of logic puzzle of trying to figure out what works best in a game. So it really ended up being a great hobby for me because it just combined so many things that I loved.
Fantastic. And let's dive into a little bit talking about Anamnesis here.
Sure.
So when did you start writing that? Like, what was your inspiration? What got you going with this game? Or actually, we should probably start with a little whistle stop of what the game is for people that aren't familiar.
Sure.
Sorry, just because I know it, I was like, yeah, tell us about it. I was like, actually, for people that aren't familiar with Anamnesis, could you give us a little elevator pitch for what the game is and what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Anamnesis is a single player game that uses tarot cards to play. And it is about a person who wakes up and doesn't remember who they are. And it plays through a series of 5 different acts, each act bringing you through a stage of learning about yourself or kind of processing what you've learned about yourself and moving forward. So it's a lot about identity and self-discovery and how to move forward with what you've learned. And I had a blast writing it. It's all a lot of prompted writing, so it's a journaling game. So each act you get different prompts, and as you get these prompts, you learn more about your character.
I was interested in having you on to talk about this because solo RPGs and journaling RPGs are kind of a new area for me. It's not something I've looked at, and I think for a lot of people in the pandemic, they kind of discovered the genre as well.
Yeah.
So were there a few that you kind of played before that were your inspiration before writing this, or do you have any other recommend as well that you kind of got you started into this genre?
Yeah, the first solo game that I played, which I will always rave about, is The Portal at Hill House by Travis Hill and Lindy Ferris Hill. It's this little cosmic horror game, and it's about going to this house, and you have to go through the rooms in order to find these objects to close this portal. And it's really interesting because as you're kind of going through the house, you roll on tables to see what feeling the rooms are giving you and like what objects you find in them. And I had never played a solo game before, and I really fell into it. Like I hadn't been writing that much at the moment, and as soon as I started playing that game, it just flowed, which was phenomenal. And it was a really cool experience. And then I played The Wretched by Chris Bissett, was also an inspiration for kind of how Anamnesis was set up in a way, like with the so Anamnesis is also divided into suits. So rather than in The Wretched, where each suit is about like a different aspect of, there's like the ship, the creature, things like that, and you can just draw any suit at any time. In Anamnesis, you divide the deck up by suits, and so you're only drawing from one suit. But it was kind of an influence in that design. Yeah.
And where did you start with your idea for it? Because the idea of kind of memory loss and key thing in the game. So what started you out for wanting to write this story?
So it actually came from it was there was an idea that I had that was completely different. And it was I thought it would be interesting. I had this idea a while ago, and so originally I was thinking it could be a D&D one-shot sort of situation, but then I was like, well, maybe it could be its own thing, wherein the GM has all of the character sheets for everybody, but all of the players have blank character sheets. The players are like don't remember who they are, and then as you play, you gradually like figure out your skills and how you relate to like this town that you find yourselves in. And so you kind of like fill out your sheet as you go. So it started as that. It's very much not that anymore.
It's changed a lot.
So it kind of went through this process of, well, this is interesting, but maybe maybe this would be more interesting as a solo game.
Mhm.
But then also, like, do I really need a character sheet? And then, well, maybe it's kind of like more of this introspective thing, and maybe it uses tarot cards, and
Mhm.
it just went down this completely different path. So it wasn't what I had originally set out to write, but I was really, once I figured out what I was doing with it, it was very exciting.
And did that come through in like playtesting? Did you start by playing with like other people, or was this just purely your own sitting writing process that it evolved into yeah, the solo kind of thing is now?
It was just kind of my writing and design process
Mhm.
as I was figuring out what to do with it. So
Mhm.
eventually, Anamnesis did have a couple play testers, a couple of my
Mhm.
friends who were
Yeah, yeah.
interested in it, which was phenomenal. I mean, their feedback was invaluable. So
Mhm.
it's, but yeah, the writing process was just kind of natural.
Amazing. I so if we could talk through kind of the structure of the game and
Yeah,
like how mechanically the game works, because I've come from like a lot of people I think traditionally where I'm playing RPGs with other people. So the idea of a solo RPG, people are like, oh, so what does that actually involve? Like,
sure.
what are the mechanics of that? So if you could just talk us through how that works in Anamnesis.
Yeah, so the game itself as a journaling game, it's one where I guess traditionally you would write about these different prompts that you get.
Mm-hmm.
Um a lot of solo games happen to be journaling games because it's kind of a way to create the story in like a tangible way and to like
Yeah.
explore that as just one person, as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um and but you could do things like keep a bullet journal or do an audio log or even just
Yeah.
think through the questions,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't feel like writing.
Yeah.
But it's a I really like solo games because they
Mm-hmm.
can be very introspective at times and they can be very
Mm-hmm.
personal in a way that sometimes group games are not.
Yeah.
Group games can be personal with the right group of people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you always hear about people putting a lot of themselves in their characters and sometimes
What?
exploring things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, who would know?
Who would
I
do
certainly
that?
have never.
I would never.
So the solo game just really allows somebody to take more control over the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and really explore different aspects of themselves or this story or this character without
Mm-hmm.
necessarily having to worry about the rest of the people at the table. Um,
Yeah.
so I've found that they can be more personal experiences and like more moving experiences sometimes
Yeah.
than games as a group.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So when you say this, the structure of the game, you're talking about like prompts and the tarot cards. So
Mhm.
if we were sitting down to do a game, like how I've got like we've got the act one here on the screen.
Yeah,
So
sure.
so mechanically, how do we get into the game?
So the first thing that you do after you divide the decks up by suits,
Hmm.
um, you draw a major arcana card. So one of the decks is the major arcana deck,
Okay.
and the first card that you draw is called the shadow, and it's
Hmm.
basically a representation of who you were in your past. And it's kind of
Hmm.
an option to fall back on if you would like, but you don't, some people will use it more than others. And I think that that is perfectly great based on the themes of the game.
Hmm.
Um, and then you move into the first act. So as you have here, Act One uses the Pentacles deck, and is Act One is all about when you first wake up. So it's really about your first impressions of yourself, and your surroundings. So where are you? Is there anything around you that is kind of striking up memories? What are you wearing? What is your voice like?
Hmm.
How do you feel about who you are as a first impression?
Yeah.
Um, and so, in order to go through this act, you draw three cards from the Pentacles deck, and those will determine the
Hmm.
three prompts that you answer here. And then for each prompt, you draw a major arcana card. And so the major arcana helps you basically answer the prompts. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you get prompt 3, which is you open your mouth and hear yourself speak. What is your voice like? You might draw the magician, you might draw the lovers, you might draw the devil, and all of those are going to have very different connotations. And so you can use that major arcana card to help inform your response to the different prompts.
And like one thing I liked about it is you don't need to know anything about tarot or something. It can just be like any art piece. You look at the card and it's what you take from it as a person. So because I was looking at it and I don't know that much about tarot, and I was like, oh, is that going to be an issue? And I think at the top you said you don't need to know, and I was like, okay, cool.
That was really important to me, actually, because I mean, honestly, when I started writing Anamnesis, I didn't know a lot about tarot. I knew like a little bit here and there, and I've learned a lot since I've learned a lot through the process of making the game and afterwards. I learned a lot more about it, but I was kind of I had some very basic knowledge of it and a couple of friends who were really interested in it. So to me, maybe that was why it was so important for me to just be like, yeah, as long as you have a deck of tarot cards, it doesn't matter if you've ever used them, you know, you can play this game.
Yeah. What made you want to use tarot cards instead of dice or like a or something like that instead then if it wasn't something you were particularly familiar with?
It's mostly because the cards are so evocative. Different decks have different art, and the deck that you play with is going to influence the story that you write. And with prompted writing, it seemed like a really great storytelling tool. The use of dice is fantastic in a lot of games, but in the case of this one, it makes things like a little bit more random than I would like. And you can argue that drawing, a card also makes things random, but when you draw that card, you can interpret things however you want to based off of that card. So I liked the flexibility of that. I liked how when you get a prompt and you draw a card, it really helps inspire ideas for it rather than a prompt itself can also inspire plenty of ideas, but it kind of can provide that little extra guidance for people who might prefer that.
Fantastic. And so there are 5 acts, did you say?
Yes.
In the game? Okay. And so throughout the act, you're going through discovering and learning more kind of about yourself and your character that you're almost kind of creating, really, as you explore. How long would a game be? Like, I know it's how long is a piece of string, because I guess it's how much you want to put into it. But roughly, when you've been playtesting and playing, how long do you find people spend with the game?
I would say probably maybe like 3 hours, give or take an hour. And that's maybe if you're doing like writing. If you're, doing an audio thing, that might take a little less time, or if you're just kind of thinking through things, that'll take even less. But I would say maybe 2 to 4 hours on average. Yeah.
Okay, and I really like that. Obviously, the tarot cards you say have that visual kind of prompt with it, but you've also taken it to kind of having an audio prompt in a way with you've got a Spotify playlist for like playing the game too.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Could you talk us through about like what your idea was with that and how that influences the game? Or
I actually. That's funny because I've never even really thought about how listening to that music could really influence how you play the game. And I guess I wanted to create a playlist that that matched the aesthetic I was going for with the game. But I just really enjoy making playlists. It's kind of another thing that I do in the TTRPG space. I actually will take commissions.
Yeah, was it? I remember I had somebody on who mentioned that you did their playlist for them. I can't remember who it was now. It wasn't Orbital Blues. Someone else we had on anyway.
That's funny.
Was it Broken?
Oh, yeah, it would have been Broken. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
That's great.
So we're talking about your playlist there with that. So
yeah,
so this is something you do for
It's I've been making playlists for since high school, right? And it's been a pretty large hobby of mine. I used to like take requests from people and make like little 8-track playlists based on just completely random prompts. And so when I started getting into the RPG space, it just kind of felt natural to bring that part of my interests over with me. So I've recently been making a lot of playlists for other designers' games, which has been a lot of fun because they're kind of like a fun challenge, right? To try to like understand that work in those themes enough that I can make a playlist that matches them. And then I'll work with the designer about like what specifically they're interested in. And and it's a lot of fun. So Anamnesis was mostly just because I really enjoy making stuff like that. And I feel like musical accompaniment can be really impactful and interesting in games. I know that when I'm kind of constantly listening to music all of the time. So if I'm playing a solo game, a lot of times I'll find some sort of playlist that I feel matches the tone and I'll pop that on, or if I'm writing. So
it makes perfect sense to me because this like solo journaling game, I really enjoy making characters for like any kind of game I'm doing. And if you're doing a very involved heavy game, it can take a while. And this is almost like, if you enjoy that process, this game is kind of exploring and creating a person. And I always have music on when I'm doing that matches the theme. So I thought the playlist was fantastic because it kind of matched that sort of thing as well. So we very much talked about this as like a kind of a solo journaling game as well, but I did notice you have a 2-player kind of modification to it. How does that work?
Sure. So I actually so Anamnesis was played on Planet Arcana, which is a D&D actual play podcast that uses wherein the deities are the major arcana. So we were kind of familiar with each other's work. I listened to the podcast. They had heard of Anamnesis, and we decided to partner up and do an episode where the DMs played Anamnesis. And so that podcast has 2 DMs. And so both of them were playing the game. So we talked about how to modify it. And so the 2-player modification actually came out of that. And they essentially, what they did was they had each of their characters, they each had one character, and they both woke up. Both of them couldn't remember where they were. They were in the same place. So they were chatting with each other. And then they drew the same prompts. So each act, they had the same prompts, but each player drew a different major arcana card for those prompts. So, if the prompt was like, you see this abandoned building that stirs up memories. Why does it stir up memories? What used to be here? Both of them got that prompt and were looking at the same building, but then they drew different major arcana cards to see how their character felt about the building. And it led to a really beautiful story. And a lot of that has to do with the DMs, J and B, who are just incredible and fantastic improvisers. And they really just made something. I was like teary-eyed at the end, actually. And it was, I had never even thought about doing it 2 players until then. But it worked really well.
Because that sounds like a really interesting sort of way to do it. Because I think if you're new, like I am, to solo kind of RPGs, I think I'm so used to having another person to bounce off. That I love the idea that there was an option to do it as a 2-player if I kind of wanted to have that kind of sort of shared experience opposed to a solo kind of experience with it. What kind of advice or recommendations would you give to somebody who's perhaps come from playing like a lot of D&D or more like a classic RPG, and if they're moving towards more solo journaling kind of games, what sort of advice would you give them for that?
I think that the biggest advice would be to go in without any sort of expectations, in the sense of it's not going to be anything like the other games that you've played. It might still be a tabletop RPG, but it's such a different genre that comparing the 2 doesn't really do any good, in my opinion. So I would be looking into it as like a completely different experience, especially depending on which game you're playing. There are some games that are a little bit more D&D-esque with tracking stats and everything, for that are solo games. But then there's a lot that are just journaling games. So I suppose the other advice would be, what type of gameplay are you interested in as a solo game? And what type of genre as well, what type of story you're interested in telling. Do you want to tell something that's more personal, like Anamnesis might be, or do you want to tell something that is just very adventurous and, monster slaying, classic sort of sword and sorcery stuff? That's going to be a very different game that you pick up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I also was wondering with Anamnesis, because one thing I thought of was like, has anyone said they've used this before a campaign to create their character?
Yes, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just me. I saw it and I was like, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of have. Part of the way that I talk about Anamnesis is that it can also be used as a character creation tool, and a few people have told me that they've done it for exactly that, which is really exciting. I think it's a cool way to explore character creation.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me that thought that as well, because I was thinking if you're planning a long campaign and you wanted to bring a character to the table that you had a clear kind of image of who they were, this could be fantastic for doing that there. So speaking a bit about the game, but speaking about the kind of self-publishing aspect of things as well. So this game's done quite well in that aspect. So obviously the game is available on itch, Blinking Birch Games, and you first, if I'm correct, did crowdfunding on that platform there.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, which really well. And then moved on to do a Kickstarter campaign, which again did very well to get like physical copies made. And then you also had an Emmy Award nomination for Best Electronic Book as well.
Yeah.
So congratulations for that.
Thank you. It's very, very exciting.
So how has it been kind of publishing again? Because obviously writing a game and creating a game is one aspect of it. And then publishing and getting a game out there is a whole other different thing.
Sure, yeah.
How has that process been for you? What's that been like?
It was a really amazing learning experience. I have zero background in any sort of publishing, crowdfunding, anything. So Anamnesis was a lot of firsts for me. It not only my first time with crowdfunding, but my first time trying to print a book, my first time dealing with shipping a book, first time.
What a time to learn how to do that.
I know, right? It actually, fortunately, it wasn't too bad because it's just a zine. And I didn't really have the only like possible extra add-on that I had with it was that there were higher tiers on the Kickstarter where somebody could get a tarot card in the mail that had like either a prompt written on it or like some interpretations of the card written on it. So there were, I think there's 72 cards in a tarot deck. That might not be true. 78?
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Confidently, I'll agree with you. It's fine.
I think it's 78.
Yeah, definitely 78. Cool.
Sure, absolutely. So I made like 78 of those, and I mailed them out. But essentially, those are really easy to just slip into a mailer. So there wasn't anything that was complicated to ship, which was really nice. I really tried to make the Kickstarter as simple as possible. I was like, no add-ons, no stretch goals. This is my first time doing one. I need to keep it simple. And it worked really well. I kept on waiting for like the ball to drop. I kept waiting for disaster to strike, and everything went really smoothly, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, it was a lot of just learning the basics. I remember I got, so Mixim, I printed through Mixim. And they have a little free packet that they'll send you that gives examples of like this little zine has like a glossy cover, and this little zine is uncoated, and this one has this paperweight, and which was great because I didn't know anything about any of it. I had no idea about any of that. I was like, what is 100
GSM? Yeah,
I had no clue. So I got that, and then I could kind of get a sense of what I wanted for Anamnesis. Did a test print with Mixim, liked the result. And yeah, so just learning all of those little things, how to use BackerKit, how to like, what's the best way to ship. I used pirateship.com, which I highly recommend for anyone. It's at least anyone in the US. I don't know if it's available outside of the US, but really convenient and free, which is great. and just and talking to a lot of designers, to a lot of other people who had gone through this process, being like, hey, how do you know how to do this thing on BackerKit? And
Yeah.
just reaching out to people, which
Mhm.
again, this community is wonderful and they're
Yeah.
really supportive, and so many people are just so willing to lend a hand and give advice and chat about their experiences with things, and that was just um, like really invaluable to me. So yeah, it
Mhm.
was a lot of learning.
Mm.
But I feel it, but the learning went well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like more prepared for the next book for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think the first one you do is always such a steep learning curve, and then
Yeah.
you feel a little bit more confident the second one, but then the second one throws some other stuff at you, so there'll be some more learning and things there.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people that watch have their own ideas for games and are interested in maybe going down the crowdfunding route. So you crowdfunded on two different platforms, on Itch and
Yes.
on Kickstarter. Did you find them to be very different experiences,
Oh
or
yeah.
okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um I first did itch funding because I was a really new designer,
Hmm.
and I had never done crowdfunding before, and running a Kickstarter seemed way more complicated and stressful
Okay.
than what I would like to start with,
Hmm.
especially as somebody who was new and didn't really have like a following that I felt would necessarily support me for a Kickstarter.
Sure.
So, itch funding had just become a thing. The
Okay.
term was just starting to float around.
Hmm.
Um, and the nice thing about itch funding is that it's not Itch.io does not have a crowdfunding platform. All itch funding is you put the game on like a sale and you set a goal for yourself.
Yeah.
You can set a goal so you can see the little bar and how far it's
Yeah.
filling, um, and you talk about it in the game's description. You say, "Hey, if the bar gets to $200, I'll hire an editor," and if the bar, so you can,
Mhm.
but it's not. There's nothing. It's still just like buying a regular old game from Itch.io.
Yeah.
Um, so that means that first of all, there's no time limit. So you can have
Mhm.
a project in itch funding for as long as you want.
Yeah.
Which if you don't want that time pressure that
Mhm.
another crowdfunding
Yeah.
platform is going to give you,
Yeah, yeah.
then it's perfect.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is that unlike something like Kickstarter, where, if you don't hit your goal, that's it. Um, with itch funding, you are getting those funds that are coming in. So,
Mhm.
a lot of times, at least in my opinion, it's kind of nice to have some sort of product available. So for
Mhm.
Anamnesis, I had the beta version available, which was
Sure.
basically like, hey, these are the rules. You can play this game. It doesn't have a nice layout and it hasn't been edited. And there's going to be updates in the future if the itch funding is successful. But even if it's
Sure.
not successful, then you at least have the beta and you can play
Yeah.
that. So people are um, backing the itch funding page,
Mhm.
knowing that it's possible that they won't. It's possible that it they are giving their money and
Yeah.
that they won't receive an updated product, but
Sure.
they are getting this other
Yeah.
thing. So
They're getting the game and
yeah,
the raw part of the game opposed to a shiny product. So, yeah.
exactly. And then so that is something to kind of keep in mind with itch funding. But it is nice that if you don't reach your main goal, you still have those funds so that you can at least do some of what you wanted to do, um,
Sure.
even if you can't do the whole thing. So I really like itch funding from
Mhm.
um, a new designer perspective. From
Mhm.
if there's anyone out there who is thinking about crowdfunding, who is stressed about it and
Mhm.
doesn't really know what to do or how to get started, I definitely recommend itch funding. The only thing about it is that it won't get the traction that something like Kickstarter will. Um,
Sure.
it's definitely probably out of all the crowdfunding sites, it's going to be the hardest to get people to look at. But if you know, it's at the um, it is even though people might flow in slower, it's at a
Mhm.
more relaxed pace, and you don't have to worry quite as much about it. Um,
Yeah.
Kickstarter, I did a 2-week Kickstarter campaign.
Mhm.
And it was amazing how well it did. Like I really, it funded on the first day and it was a huge
Ooh.
relief. Yeah. Um, but even so, I was surprised. I underestimated how much stress or how tired, I should say how exhausting. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
it was that stressful, but it was exhausting,
Mhm.
that running a Kickstarter would be. So, and
Yeah.
only because you have that shorter time frame, and even if you've already funded, it's nice to still get more if you can, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of advertising that goes for it and the time crunch and the updates that you write. So it's definitely, I was pretty exhausted by the end of those 2 weeks. And I
Mhm.
felt like the week after that, I was just in like relaxed self care recovery mode.
Mhm. Yep,
Um,
yep, yep.
yeah, I don't know if I'm ever going to do a Kickstarter that's more than 2 weeks. Or, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm actually not sure I'll be using the platform more. Maybe, but I'm kind of curious about. There's so many other platforms to try out there, and so I think I'm
Yeah.
going to experiment with some other ones. But yeah, so it's Kickstarter gets more attention.
Mhm.
It's really good at drawing in people,
Mhm.
but it is a lot more complicated, and
Yeah.
it's a lot more exhausting.
For sure. I think if you're, especially if you're a first-time indie RPG creator, you likely have a day job or something else you're doing, like,
Yes.
and so doing a Kickstarter does take up so much of your time and energy. So you're going to have like a second job while it's running, which
Hmm.
is a lot.
Yeah.
But like from what you said about itch, it is a lot more in your own time scale. So I think it's so much more accessible if you're a smaller creator and you have other, demands and things in your life. It sounds like it's a lot better. So thanks for talking kind of through that.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, yeah, do you have? I think with crowdfunding, one of the things people talk about a lot is building community, and and you obviously are on Twitter and you're on TikTok and things. How do you go about creating community on those kind of platforms?
Sure.
What advice would you give to people that are just entering that sphere?
Yeah, I'm still working it out myself. I feel
Okay.
like, but at the same time, I think that, I think that a lot of it is formed by the stuff that you talk about and the way that you
Mhm,
talk about things, right? Like if on your platform you are not only advertising your own stuff, but you're also trying to advertise for other people, right? If you're also
mhm.
like shouting out things that you really enjoy, if you,
Yeah.
yeah, right. This is great. I think that like shouting out other people's work, saying, "Hey, I just played this game and this game rules, and you should check it out," right?
Mhm.
Or just asking questions, being there for people who are also getting started and
Yeah.
who are really trying to get over those first hurdles of learning how to do things.
Mhm.
That goes a really long way in making a really caring and compassionate community. It's really, I really try to be very positive on my
Mhm.
platforms. With the TikTok videos that I do, when I talk about other games, one of the things that I really stick to in those is I never say anything negative about the game. They're actually not
Okay.
reviews. Some people will call them review videos, but they're really not because I'm not actually reviewing them. I'm just talking about them. I'm just sharing
So
something I
it's
like.
a
So
shout out. Yeah.
yeah, essentially, it's more of a shout out,
Mm.
or like just hyping up a game.
Mhm.
Um, I don't say anything negative about them because there's like it's just not the point of the platform,
Mhm.
or not the platform. It's not the point of the videos that I make. The
Yeah.
point is really to like show other people what's out there, and get some attention and recognition
Mhm.
for smaller designers.
Yeah.
And being like, these are things I don't like about this game isn't really gonna be
Yeah.
helpful for that.
Yeah.
It's to really help other people on the platform see what other stuff is out there besides D&D. Um, and then just like chatting with people, if you can. I think that, community is not built in a bubble, right? And so
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
you and it's tricky in like an online world, right? There's Twitter, there's TikTok, there's Discord, there's all sorts of stuff and spaces, and sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming. I know that I am in so many Discord servers and I've muted all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But find your space, find like a nice space, find like the people that you really enjoy chatting with and that you can really like bounce ideas off of very easily. And whether that is like a singular Discord server or even just like a group chat with just like a handful of people or just like individual designers. And I've done a lot of, in the last few months, I've met with a lot of game designers one-on-one just to like get to know people and chat and see what's going on in their lives and in their work. And it's been amazing. It's been so much fun getting to know people beyond the little like icon on their Twitter. Yeah. So that's kind of, I feel like I do a lot better with one-on-one conversations or like very small group conversations. And that's kind of what I've found is great for me. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I guess really just find the community that you want to be part of, right? Find that space where you can talk to other designers and and that can really be amazing. Being able to chat with other people about design.
For sure. So if we've been talking about Anamnesis, your game, if people are interested and want to kind of learn more about your game or purchase it, is Itch the best place to go to?
Yeah. So that's going to be Blinking Birch Games at .itch.io. And that is you can get digital copies right from Itch, but it also will have the links to everywhere that you can buy physical copies as well. So
Fantastic.
there are some copies in some stores, and there's also because when I received some copies of Anamnesis, some of them have like scratches on the cover or bent pages, and I got replacements for them. I will say that Mixam was really great about sending replacement copies of stuff, but I still have those. So I also directly from the Itch.io page, I sell discounted damaged copies to anywhere in the world.
Great.
Yeah, so I think it's like $12 worldwide, including the shipping, which I just
nice.
I don't want to just like toss them, but I also feel bad giving them to like stores to sell because that's I don't want to give them damaged copies. So that's an option too. That's a little cheaper for people.
We do that at EM Publishing as well. So because sometimes a book just has like a dent or a ding or something in it, and it's nothing that's like the game's broken, you can't play it. But if somebody's just bought their brand new game, it's a bit like, oh. So we just sell them at conventions a bit cheaper because people can look at it and decide if it's a bit damaged, but it's fine. So
that's a perfect idea. That's a great idea to do them at convention. Yeah, I love that.
Because then people can see it and you can say this is the damaged part. So someone can say, yeah, I can see it's scuffed in the corner, it's got this, but I don't mind and I'll take it for discounts. I think that's a great idea. But yeah, so if you're listening to the podcast, the link is in the show notes for that. And if you're watching, it's on screen right now. So get Blinking Birch Games on Itch there to check that out. Sam, are there any questions I haven't asked you that I should have about Anamnesis or anything else that you want to share with us about the game before we're coming up to the end of our time?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me on and asking me about it. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for coming on to share your game. Before you go, though, I do get everyone to share some other games. So do you have any recommendations for other kind of indie tabletop RPGs? The rules are it can't be D&D and it can't be one you've made. So they're the only rules.
Perfect. So many. As far as other solo games go, I mentioned Portal at Hill House and The Wretched. But one other one that I really, really like is Long Haul 1983 by Sean Patrick Kane. That game is you play as a long haul truck driver who it's also kind of like a cosmic horror sort of thing. I'm a fan of that genre.
Love it. Why not?
Yeah. And so you're a long haul truck driver and you're driving across this interstate and the roads are abandoned. You realize that there's nobody on the roads. And so it kind of is the start of this journey of trying to get home to somebody that you care about. And at the end of each day, you do this audio log that is basically in the form of a voicemail that you're leaving for this person who you're like trying to get in touch with. It is really good. I've played it once. I died so fast. I really want to play it again. It's really a fantastic game. And there's also a playlist that goes along with that one too. But it's really unique because the game will actually tell you to like play certain songs during different prompts. It's really cool. So yeah, I love that one. As for like another, either a single player or a 2-player game. Another Cosmic Horror one actually is Relict by Moss Powers. It's really fun. And it's basically about 1 or 2 people going to essentially like I'm thinking about the game that I played in, so I don't know if all of the games are about this, but basically we kind of went and confronted this like eldritch entity essentially, and you kind of have these like bonds that you're holding on to, these like strengths that you're holding on to, which you can like lose or gain throughout the game. It was really cool. It was told a really neat story. And then the other one that's totally different. It's called Ravenheim. It's by Tag Leons, and it is a game inspired by Gothic literature. And it's a group game, and you're playing it's a great one for like fall season. I gotta say,
spooky season time. Yeah,
amazing, perfect for it. It's basically you are in this kind of crumbling old estate, and you're playing as like different archetypes from Gothic literature, and you are solving some sort of mystery that's going on in the estate. So it's probably maybe one of the most fun I've ever had GMing a one-shot, because the GM, you play essentially as the estate, which is full of all of these ravens, all these crows. They're like all over the estate, and so you're playing as the crows who are like interfering with the characters, and it's a lot of fun. So I highly recommend that one, Ravenheim.
That sounds really good fun. Thank you so much for those recommendations.
Yeah, of course.
So we can check all those out, and then maybe there'll be guests on the show in the future, because that's also secretly why I asked the question, so I know who. Sam, thank you so much for giving up your time and coming and sharing your game with us. If you have any other games in the future, do let us know so we can have you back on to share those ones as well.
Sure.
But yeah, and thank you very much to everyone who's listening or came along to watch. Next week on September 19th, we have another guest of Thirsty Sword Lesbians we're talking about. So if you have any questions that, we are recording live, so come along, recording at 10 p.m. BST live on Twitch to watch that. Or you can always catch up and listen to the podcast like you are here as well. So I think that's it for this week. So from myself and Sam, thank you very much and goodbye.